Please welcome the 17th United States Centennial.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. And it's always wonderful to be back here in Colorado and in a place where there are a lot of people with common sense, as opposed to some other areas that we know of. Now, 243 Julys ago, think about that, the Declaration of Independence set forth that all of us are endowed by our Creator, aka God, some people forgot what that means, with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now just think about that. Life. What does that mean? It means we don't kill little babies. That's very important. And liberty, what does that mean? It means that we don't create a government that tries to control our lives from cradle to grave. And the pursuit of happiness doesn't mean that we guarantee anybody anything, but it means that we get out of their way and we facilitate their ability to use the talents that God has given them. And those are the things that we have control over and we must exert. We are also the ones who decide, in terms of the pursuit of happiness, whether we're going to be happy or not. We can decide to be nice and happy, or sad and mean. And a lot of people these days seem to be choosing the other one. But you know, the fact of the matter is, if somebody calls you a name, says something mean about you, you have a choice. You can let that disturb you and you can try to retaliate, or you can ignore it and go on and do something important. You know, I choose the latter, and I think that really is what tends to make you happy. But I want to talk a little bit about homes and housing. You know, homes are not simply physical structures, but they're social, cultural, and economic engines. Places where families are raised, where memories are created, and where communities are interconnected. Also, housing is the largest sector of our national economy, not just in terms of GDP, but in terms of the impact that it has on the lives of American families. You know, when I think about the importance of housing, I remember as a youngster, I loved being at home. We lived in one of those little 700 square feet GI homes. But, you know, back in those days, families were raised in 700 square feet places and they were perfectly happy. And, but when my parents got divorced when I was 8 years old, you know, we were homeless. My mother only had a third grade education. Fortunately, some relatives in Boston took us in. Tenement, multifamily dwelling, rats, roaches, everything you could imagine, violence, gangs. And the goal was always to get back to our home in Detroit. And after a couple of years, we were actually able to return to Detroit. Couldn't afford to be in our GI home again, but still in a multifamily dwelling, still with significant wildlife. But nevertheless, we were getting closer. And, you know, a few more years after that, and through my mother's incredible hard work, she worked 2 and 3 jobs at a time. And, she tried to stay off of welfare because she didn't want the government controlling her life. You know, that was something about my mother. But we were able to return to that home. And I'll have to tell you, it was just an incredibly warming experience to be able to get back there. It helps me to realize how important it is for people to have a safe home environment in which to grow up and which to thrive. But, responsible home ownership is really the number one builder of financial capital in this country. The average net worth of a renter is $5,000. The average net worth of a homeowner is $200,000. That's a 40-fold difference. And that's why, we see the wealth gap that people are talking about so often. And it is important for us to be thinking about ways that we can create home ownership, but it has to be done in a responsible way. People were talking about this over a decade ago and how important it was to get people into homes, and they were messing around with debt-to-income ratios and credit scores and all kinds of subprime loans. And what did that do? That doesn't do anybody a favor if you put them in a home they can't afford. They lose the home, they lose their credit, they lose their future opportunities, and today there are fewer homeowners than there were before we started down that road. It's important that we learn from those things and learn how to do things in a very responsible way. Now, with the help of President Trump's policies, we the people are witnessing record low unemployment, historically strong national economy, unprecedented job growth, consumer confidence, productivity, and financial optimism, all of them having returned. And, the president doesn't spend a lot of time talking about, this demographic or this group over here and how we're going to help this one and this one. He believes that a rising tide floats all boats. And you create the right kind of atmosphere. And, a lot of people are critical of him because he doesn't talk about this group or that group. But aren't we all part of the same group? Aren't we all Americans? Don't we all share the same thing? But even though we've had a lot of prosperity lately, which, I actually find it kind of interesting because the economists, they keep saying things are getting ready to dive. They're going to go down because, there's this natural cycle. Things go up and they go down. It really doesn't have anything to do with the president or anything like this. What a bunch of crap. What happens? There is a cycle. There's no question about that. But it's because we have people in control who understand the economy, and then we get people who don't. So if obviously if you were suddenly to have a bunch of people who came in, and I'm not talking about any particular party or group of people. I'm just saying, if you had a bunch of people who came in, they said, let's raise taxes, and let's create a whole bunch more environmental regulations and other kind of regulations, guess what would happen to the economy? It would go right down. So that's where the cycle occurs, and I think it's very important that the people of our country understand that this is not just a natural phenomenon. It has a lot to do with the people that we put in office. Now, as a result of our policies, millions of hard-working Americans are successful, but because of the housing shortage, we have millions of people who simply can't get their foot in the door when it comes to home ownership. And we've reached a point where many of our nation's teachers, nurses, firemen, policemen can't afford to live in the same communities that they work in. Now, fortunately at HUD, we have a prescription to help lift our forgotten men and women out of the doldrums into a path of self-sufficiency. And that prescription has 3 key ingredients: revitalization, innovation, and deregulation. And across the country, even here in Colorado, many communities have faced serious challenges over the years due to persistent lack of financial investment. And these places have the ability to succeed, but what they need is an opportunity. And rather than waiting for those opportunities, What we're trying to do is create those opportunities. And one of the most powerful creations has been the opportunity zones. There have been few programs in modern history with the power to unleash the spirit of American enterprise as effectively as the opportunity zones. They were created as a result of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and basically gave all 50 governors, as well as the 5 territories, the ability to designate 25% of their economically distressed areas as opportunity zones into which unrealized capital gains could be invested for the long term. And if that money was left there for 5 years, you get a 10% decrement in the amount of capital gains owed on the original investment. 15 years, you get, for 2 more years, make it 7 years, you get a 15% decrement. And if you leave it in for 10 years, you don't have to pay any capital gains on the new money that was actualized. And it's a wonderful opportunity. You know, some people complain and they say, this is just a big get-rich scheme for rich people in a way that they can make more money. Newsflash, rich people are going to make more money anyway, okay? They're going to invest their money somewhere. They're not going to put it in the mattress. So if the government can do something that encourages them to invest that money in the economically depressed areas, we all win as a result of that. So, you know, you get kind of tired of hearing that people always, you know, complaining and all this class warfare stuff. You know, this is the last place on earth where we should be having class warfare. I mean, think about America, where people can come from virtually anywhere and go anywhere according to how hard they want to work and according to their vision. And, you know, interestingly enough, you think about the early days of our country, a lot of people were critical of us, people overseas, because they looked over here and they saw Vanderbilts, and the Kellogg's and the Fords and the Rockefellers, Carnegie's Mellons, people with enormous amounts of money, and then everybody else. They said, you can't run a society like that. You have to have an overarching government that receives the funding and then equitably redistributes it. Have you heard that before? You know what it's called. But interestingly enough, what they did not understand about America, and what people still don't understand about America, those wealthy families that I just talked about, they weren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But instead of like the land barons of Europe accumulating money and just passing it down from generation to generation, they invested in our country. They built the transcontinental railroads and the textile mills and the factories and the seaports and the mechanism that created the most powerful and dynamic middle class the world has ever seen, which rapidly propelled us to the pinnacle of the world. But it didn't stop there. They also built schools and universities and libraries and museums and the substance of the American dream. And that's what's different about America. That's what has been different about America. That's what should stay different about America. We don't need to trade our system for what anybody else has. We have a wonderful system. We need to learn from it. But you know, these opportunity zones, lots of wonderful things are happening. We already are seeing that the land in opportunity zones is being evaluated at 20% increase versus 10% in the non-opportunity lands. So guess who owns that land? Some of those 35 million people who live in opportunity zones. And guess who's benefiting from that increased price? Those people who live there. So the people who say that certain people are not receiving benefits are not looking at that. They're not looking at the 401ks. They're not looking at a whole bunch of stuff. But here's what we really need to be thinking about. How do we reach out to those who are in distress? How do we help them to be able to climb the ladders of opportunity and really become part of their system? How do we not get into our respective corners and start demonizing other people and creating such division? Because it was Jesus who said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." It never has stood, it never will stand. And we each have a sphere of influence, and we can use that sphere of influence to resist the purveyors of hatred and division that are trying to destroy this nation. And we should never be a part of that. Now, to ensure that the Opportunity Zones reach their full potential, last December, President Trump established the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, which I have the privilege to chair. Scott Turner is our executive director. He's been doing a great job. And the Revitalization Council consists of 16 federal agencies and federal-state partnerships with a mission to make better use of public funding in the revitalization of economically distressed areas. We've already identified 160 federal programs that can be used to increase investments in the zones through grant preference points, loan qualifications, reduced fees, and modifications of eligibility criteria. So these are really exciting times, for the government's entrepreneurial spirit and aligning it with the private market. And the Revitalization Council is also doing listening tours, hearing from the entrepreneurs, the investors, community leaders on things that they think would be helpful in the creation of these zones. And we're fighting hard to make sure that all the voices in the western states and throughout the nation are heard, because all the best ideals don't necessarily come from Washington. In fact, most of them don't come from Washington, but they come from the people, and if we're willing to listen to them, and the government needs to recognize the people don't work for the government works for the people. That's the way it's supposed to work. Now, a lot of our bravest citizens, our military, are the people that sometimes come home and find themselves in a homeless situation. And, they have a lot of trauma. 1% of our population protects the other 99% of us. And we should be willing to do whatever is necessary to make sure that they are adequately taken care of. And, I'm happy to say that since 2010, the number of homeless vets has decreased by half. Just last year, the number went down by 5.4%, but we still have a lot of work to do. 3 states have declared an effective end to veterans' homelessness, and another state will be declaring it very soon. And this is essential, and it's through some of our programs like the HUD-VASH program, where HUD provides the housing, the VA provides the wraparound services, that we're able to get people out of these horrendous situations. And it's learning from that program and applying that to homelessness in general that we're able to make a tremendous amount of progress. Homelessness seems to be most rampant in the places that have the most regulations. For instance, Los Angeles, 80% of the land is zoned for single-family housing with a certain amount of property. And then you throw on that the other regulatory impediments, and it gets to be very expensive. Across the nation, 25 to 27% of the cost of a new family, single-family home is regulatory costs. For multifamily, it's 32.1%, up to 42% in the most costly areas of our country. Those are the things that have to be tackled, and those are the things that we are tackling. If you want to know some of the things that we're doing at HUD, which you'll never hear on the media, but you go to HUD.gov and you look under the accomplishment sections. You'll be blown away with what's happened in the last couple of years. And I want you to look at the Humans of HUD section, which has stories about individuals who are affected by our programs. And those are really, really cool. There's one story of a young woman who couldn't get housing, and she wanted to get a voucher. Finally got a voucher, couldn't find anybody who would accept vouchers. Finally found a landlord who would accept them, got involved in our family self-sufficiency program, started taking nursing classes, became a nurse, became a homeowner, became a landlord who accepts vouchers. I mean, so it's pretty cool. And you'll also read about our showcase of innovation for affordable housing techniques, which was on the National Mall a month ago. These things are absolutely amazing, and what we're able to do, our innovation has not slowed down. What has prevented us from using all of it are the regulations that are in place, and we're in the process of getting rid of those and making them work in a way that's much more effective. But the thing I want to really leave you with is the fact that our future as a nation is within our own hands. We're the ones who decide what is going to happen to us, and we're the ones who decide what our nation is going to look like. Thomas Jefferson said, "It will not be the government, it will not be the politicians, it will be the people of the United States of America who will save us when we get to the point where we're about to change into something else." We are potentially at that point now, but what we must remember is that when we're singing the Star Spangled Banner and we get to the end and it says the land of the free and the home of the brave, we must remember what are the things that we believe in. What are the values and principles? What kind of people are we? Do we care about each other? Are we willing to develop the God-given talents that we have? Are we one nation under God? And if so, then we must remember, if we're going to be the land of the free, we must also be the home of the brave. Thank you very much.